Yes.
Yep.
Okay, wonderful. Bienvenue. Thank you everyone for coming to the 32nd event of Disrupting Disruptions, the Feminist and Accessible Publishing, Communications and Technologies Practices Speaker and Workshop Series. Today's event is co-sponsored by some fantastic folks who will be speaking in a minute. I'm Dr. Alex Ketchum, and I'm a professor of feminist and social justice studies at McGill and the organizer of this series. The Feminist and Accessible Publishing, Communications and Technologies Practices Speaker and Workshop Series seeks to bring together scholars, creators, and people in industry working at the intersections of digital humanities, computer science, feminist studies, disability studies, communication studies, LGBTQ studies, history, and critical race theory. We are hosting 12 free virtual and professionally captioned events this winter, and you're welcome to join us at all of them. You can find our full schedule as well as our video recordings of past events at disruptingdisruptions.com. You can also find our list of sponsors, including SHRC, Milieu, and the Indigenous Futures Lab. Next week, Yeshi Milner of Data for Black Lives will be speaking on Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Past series speakers Suzanne Kite and Jess McLean have pointed to the physical and material impacts of the digital world. While the events this semester are virtual, everything that we do is tied to the land and the space that we are on. Furthermore, as this series seeks to draw attention to power relations that have been invisibilized, it is important to acknowledge Canada's long colonial history and current political practices. Two of today's hosts are currently located in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal, on unceded Kanien'kehá:ka territory. Furthermore, the ongoing organizing efforts by the Wet'suwet'en people at the Unistoten camp make clear the ever-present and ongoing colonial violence in Canada. Interwoven with this history of colonization is one of enslavement and racism. For example, the series is affiliated with the IGSF of McGill University. The university's namesake, James McGill, enslaved Black and Indigenous peoples. It was in part from the money he acquired through these violent acts that McGill University was founded. These histories are here with us in this space and inform the conversations we have today. I encourage you to learn about the lands that you are on. nativeland.ca is a fantastic resource for doing so. For this event, recording is enabled so the video can be embedded on our website. Don't worry though, only the speakers will be shown in the video. We also have a Q&A option available. You should see it at the bottom of your screen. So throughout the talk, you may type in your questions in the Q&A box, and there will be some time at the end for Dr. Elinor Carmi to answer them. We can't guarantee that every question will be answered, but we are grateful to the discussion that you generate. Thank you today for our captionist, Ishan. Now to Fenwick, who will do further introductions. Thank you, Fenwick.
Thank you very much. And I just wanted to thank Dr. Carmi and Dr. Ketchum today, because this talk had originally been planned for April 2020 and life intervened. And it's been a really fantastic opportunity to bring Dr. Carmi here to Montreal. And unfortunately, it's not in person, but we are very thankful that we can have this online and we can see so many people in attendance today. And so thank you all for being here today. This talk in part is sponsored not only by Concordia, but also by the Dean's Office of the Faculty of Information and Media Studies, or FIMS, at Western University, and the Infoscape Research Lab at Ryerson University. And one of the things that we found is that there's a real opportunity in this pandemic to find connection and collaboration online. And that's been something I've been very thankful for to be here today. And so I myself am representing the Algorithmic Media Observatory and the Machine Agencies Working Group at the Milieu Institute at Concordia University. And I'm very happy to share that we have a really fantastic speaker series lined up this winter. So we have a series of talks planned in this series, including Johannes Brugger, Christina Dunbar-Hester, Anna Lauren Hoffman, and Devin Powers. And so Dr. Carmi is presenting the first in our series. And I encourage you to check out my Twitter account or our website for further details about these great talks. And so now it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Elinor Carmi, who is a postdoctoral research associate in digital culture and society at the Communication and Media Department at Liverpool University. Dr. Carmi researches broad issues involving deviant media, internet standards, cyberfeminism, digital advertising, digital inclusion, data literacies, internet governance, and sound studies. And I think one testament of the excellence of this book that Dr. Carmi will talk about is the kind of sophistication in bringing these works together and the deep commitment to interdisciplinary research, which is so fantastic when reading to see all these links put together. And I'm looking forward to the discussion. Presently, Dr. Carmi is working on 3 major research projects concerned with data literacy as it relates to big data, the COVID-19 pandemic, and democracy. Dr. Carmi's second book, on which this talk is based today, Media Distortions, Beyond the Understanding the Power Behind Spam, Noise, and Other Deviant Media, is part of the Steve Jones Digital Formation Series at Resling Publishing and Open Access. And it's been a delight to read this book. And as I mentioned, it's so fantastic, not only for its disciplinarity, its history, and its music references, which are music references I typically get, which is kind of great for reading academic books. She also tweets at Elinor_Carmi on Twitter. And with that, I pass it to Dr. Carmi to present. Thank you so much for being with us today.
So hi, everybody. Let me just share the screen. And I hope that you can all see that. And just before I start, I really want to thank Alex and Fenwick and Greg and everybody that's been involved to make this happen. I already had an Airbnb booked for Montreal, and as I sort of published the book, which was in the best timing in the century, probably in mid-March, I saw it all sort of crumbling down, and I felt really bad because I really wanted to visit Montreal, and of course also the universities there. So I'm really happy that we can actually do this online. And I really also want to thank everybody. I saw that there's quite a lot of people here. So thank you so much. I know that we're all kind of like zoomed out and nobody has power to, to engage or sort of be fully focused. I really appreciate that you're all here. And so I'm going to present, I think, around 40 minutes, depending on how fast I talk, which I talk pretty fast. And then I would be really looking forward to listening to your questions. So I think I'm just going to start, and I just also want to let you know that I have a website specially made for this book. So if you want to check out the playlist that I've done for it, and also the kind of different kind of things that didn't manage to go inside the book, then please feel free to visit the website. And I think I'm going to start with, the main question of sort of why focus on the deviant, which for me is, I think, a sort of a common thread also in my previous book, which was about the Israeli psychedelic trance culture. And I think both of these projects, I basically want to understand how specific kind of cultures or phenomenon become categorized as deviant. So I think sort of my starting point is that I always see different kind of cultures and phenomenon, not as inherently deviant. And I sort of, if you would like to see it through the comic world, like I would go to the origin story of why are they categorized as deviant. So I also want to focus on why, what are the benefits of examining different kind of deviant or, dark or things that are sort of outside the norms. And I would give you several sort of benefits for that. So one of them, and for me, the main one, is the politics of sort of drawing boundaries of media categories of between deviance and the norm. And within that, when I was writing the book, I was trying to understand who created these categories, why and with what rationale, who does this category serve, and how do these categories affect the way that you engage with and understand media. And another really sort of other important points for me is to question what is a media phenomenon. And for me, I think one of the most important thing, and this is something that I do in this book quite a lot, is to examine things that were, previously we were told that only computer scientists can sort of examine, such as web cookies or algorithms or things like that. And I'm giving you on the side here the example of Facebook, where they sort of try to tell us about how machine learning powers the newsfeed algorithm. And I think that as media scholars for many years, we were sort of told that we cannot examine these kind of things. And this is what happened to me when I tried to examine spam. When I started to examine it, I realized that actually it's mostly been debated with computer scientists. And I think it's really important for media scholars, but also other types of social sciences and humanities scholars to engage with these kind of technological, either artifacts or kind of behaviors that are usually preserved to only be examined by computer scientists, because I think that we can have and add to the discussion a lot of critical points of view. So I actually wrote a post because I was really pissed off by the way that Facebook sort of presented, oh, it's just machine learning and nothing else. And I wrote an angry post about it. And I think that, you know, we need to invite ourselves into the conversations, because sometimes we are not invited. And, you know, another thing is sort of to question our methodological practices, which is, again, sort of in my research and in this book, I actually analyzed technical standards I analyzed for web cookies, for example. So I think it's important for us to not be sort of deterred. It's like, oh, you know, only computer scientists can understand that. So what would I have to, you know, to say about that? And the last thing is sort of to examine things that we take for granted and the common sense in boring media. And this is, again, when I was starting to examine spam, one of the fun parts about doing research on spam is that everybody that you tell it to says, oh, you know, I have a lot of emails about, you know, with dick pics and, you know, different kind of Viagra emails. Can you solve it? And I was like, at the beginning, I was really pissed off. But then I realized that actually everybody thinks that they know what this means, but actually we have a very limited understanding of what that means. So in short, with these points, what I'm trying to say is that with examining deviant media, we have a lot of power to sort of shine a light and to listen to sort of what are the things that are happening and what are the kind of power structures that are making these kind of phenomenon deviant or not. So I mentioned previously media power, and I heard that Alex also said media power, sort of power relations. So I was really happy to hear that, because I think for me, one of the guiding things in all of my research around media and technology has always been about power. But most often when we sort of listen theories around power, we mostly hear Michel Foucault's fantastic research about the Panopticon. I think that according to the audience here, I can pretty much bet that most people understand that or know about that theory. But one of the things that sort of bothered me is that this kind of over-reliance on optic terminology. So, you know, a lot of new media scholarship, if we're, you know, examining algorithms or AI or whatever, everybody, you know, conceptualizes that through, you know, vision and visibility, transparency, or of course, Frank Pasquale's book, The Black Box Society. And while I think that these terms are good in themselves, I feel that they sort of have shortcomings. And some of these shortcomings are around this kind of not being able to fully encapsulate the multiplicities of actors, multiplicities of spaces, multiplicities of times, multiplicities of purposes, and the different kind of architectures that are in play. So, when I developed my theory, I was relying on different kind of fields. I was relying on media theory, on STS, software studies, feminist technoscience, critical legal studies, sound studies. And I was, you know, as I was collecting the data, I was sort of realizing the kind of theory that I want to develop, which means that I was following the grounded theory. So if you want a bit of because I'm gonna just shortly mention the concepts that I've developed, but if you want sort of like an in-depth understanding of which kind of things I took from what, then feel free to sort of check it in the book and get a better understanding. Now, I know that we're always very much encouraged to sort of to be interdisciplinary, but it's also quite difficult because then each kind of field is quite deterrent from the way that you sort of conceptualize that. I hope that I can sort of let you into sort of the theory that I developed. And what I'm basically going to talk about in this talk is two main concepts that I've developed. And they all rely on knowledge production, which is reliant on science and technology and the history of science and the sort of the power relation of producing knowledge. So I'm going to talk about two main practices. One of them is processed listening, which is the production of knowledge, and the other one is the ordering of this knowledge, which is arithmedia. And if this doesn't make any sense to you, don't worry, I'm going to explain it shortly. And so process listening is a mode of listening whereby practitioners who can come from different professions and interests listen to different sources by using several tools in different times to produce different kinds of knowledge for similar purposes. So for example, that would be if we're thinking about Facebook, and the picture that you're seeing here is the kind of the listening that is happening to you when you're browsing online. So imagine, for example, Facebook, which listens to your behavior within the platform and outside the platform. It uses different kind of tools. So for example, web cookies and pixels in different time periods. So meaning that, you know, they listen to me now, they listen to me in the future, they listen to my behavior in an ongoing way in order to produce a profile. Now, what do they do then? You know, that was the first step of, you know, producing the knowledge. But what do these companies then sort of do with that knowledge? And then I figured out that when we talk about these kind of thing of what happens to knowledge in the online realm, most of the sort of concepts that we use are flow and data stream, data flow, data traffic channeling. But when I was using these terms in work, in earlier work, I felt that it didn't quite encapsulate the sort of the strategies and the specific intentions of ordering specific things in specific time and spaces on digital media and analog media. So I was very much influenced by Raymond Williams' planned flow concept, feminist technoscience notion of process, sort of this kind of ongoing process of listening, but also ordering out our behavior. And then of course, Henry Lefebvre's rhythm analysis. And so I developed this concept called rhythmedia, which is complementary to process listening. And basically it says that this is the way that media companies, for example, Facebook, reorder different components in a way that orchestrates desired rhythm, which is how they define basically sociality, while filtering out problematic rhythms, which is spam or antisocial behavior. Now, these practitioners conduct the way that mediated architectures change according to the knowledge that they gain from process listening by listening to people's behavior across multiple spaces. And again, don't worry if this doesn't make sense to you. I'm going to give you an example through one of the case studies that I've done. So one of the things, so in the book, I think I maybe skipped that slide, but basically I have 3 case studies in my book where I examined 3 kind of deviant media categories. I focus on early 20th century bell telephone and how they conceptualize noise. And then I focus on this case study, which I'm gonna explore with you today, which is the early 2000s and late 1990s, early 2000s, where I'm examining spam. And then I'm focusing on Facebook. But I kind of feel that, you know, when we talk about today about media power, we're talking a lot about Facebook, and I feel like we also need to remember what were the mechanisms that enable Facebook to become today. And I know that, you know, Greg Elmer, who is here in the audience I saw, is one of the first, I think, scholars to sort of identify that in his amazing book from 2003, Profiling Machines. And this is basically trying to understand what were the mechanisms that allow different kind of behaviors to exist and to sort of provide the foundation for all of the big tech companies that we know today, like Google and Facebook and all of that. So I just want to remind you that at the end of the 1990s and the beginning of 2000, started to situate us, we had the dot-com bubble crash. And I think that, you know, as media scholars and especially media historians, we know that just because there is kind of a media invention doesn't necessarily mean that it would succeed. And what we saw in that kind of breaking point of the internet was a change in how the internet and the web is funded. So basically we saw a transition between subscription and this kind of the free platforms that we know today that are basically trading us, our profiles. And I think that this is a really important point in time, which basically provides the foundation for everything that we know today. So, you know, when I started this project, I wanted to understand, so what is spam and how did kind of different organizations define it? So The IETF, which is the Internet Engineering Task Force, defined it as mass unsolicited electronic mail, and Spam House, which I actually wanted to interview for this project, but they did not want to be interviewed, argue that this is unsolicited bulk emails. Pretty simple, right? It appears that it's a bit more complicated. So I was trying to see not only how different kind of organizations define it, but also how it's defined according to the law. And the Electronic Privacy Directive from 2002 sort of wanted to regulate what was starting to be this new online realm, this new kind of online industry. And so the way that they defined spam, which is unsolicited communications, you can see it's the use of automated calling systems without human intervention, fax, if somebody remembers what that is, or electronic mail for the purpose of direct marketing, may only be allowed in respect to subscribers giving their prior consent. And I sort of highlighted different kind of things that are important for our debate slightly later, so please, put it in your memory. But then I wanted to look, okay, so besides these kind of this internet standards and the law, how do different kind of organizations define that, like the OECD and different kind of organizations? And then I started to realize that actually, beyond these seemingly, it's only email, which is what I've been told when I started to do this research, it was actually a much larger type of definition. So even in the European Commission, when I analyzed different kind of policy documents and also the OECD, I started to realize that there are a lot of practices that fall underneath the category of spam, which is malware, disruption, illegal content, harmful content, pornography, hacking, and all of these things that are basically harming, or these kind of behaviors that should be outlawed in this new online market that is starting to be founded. Now, at the same time, in the same sort of time period, another thing happens. Now, as I said before, in this time, when we moved from subscription to this kind of the free content, as I'm sure all of the audience here knows, nothing comes for free. So what was happening is that our behaviors were sold to different kind of advertising companies. So in 2001, the IAB, which is the Internet Advertising Bureau, wanted to sort of standardize how you measure behaviors, because if this is a market, we need this kind of standardization of the currencies that we're going to deal with, right? So what was interesting here is that you see that they have like different kind of definitions. So for example, what they talk about is 5 primary metrics of measuring different kind of behaviors. And what you can see here is the top metrics: ad impression, clicks, unique visitors, total visit, page impression. Sorry. As you can see here. But one of the most important things, that one of the main tools to measure that behavior was web cookies. And I was really intrigued by sort of what is web cookies. And here you can see the IETF sort of standard. And, basically what this means is that when I'm, for example, asking to read The Guardian, I write The Guardian on my browser, and I get images and text that has The Guardian, but at the same time, I'm also being sent a lot of cookies. So as you can see here, an origin server may include also multiple set of cookies in the header and response. Now, the reason why we don't actually see these kind of cookies was that, the advertisers at that time said, oh, this is gonna confuse people, right? Like we're gonna show them, if you think about, if you have all of these kind of ad blockers, if you were gonna show it to them, it's gonna confuse them. So we need to hide that underneath this kind of slick interface where they wouldn't be able to see what's happening in the back end of their screens. Now, if we're going back to the e-privacy directive, when we see sort of how they approach web cookies, is that they say, such devices such as web cookies can be legitimate and useful tools, for example, in analyzing effectiveness and blah, blah, blah. But basically, what I realized is that cookies are a form of communication, because when you ask most people, and specifically computer scientists, what they would tell you is that cookies is just a text file. But actually what cookies do is they communicate different kind of things, different kind of behaviors that you're doing on specific websites. And they communicate that between, if it's a first party cookie, it will be, if you remember when I said The Guardian, it will be the Guardian is communicating with my browser to understand what I'm doing in a specific page. If it's a third party cookie, that would mean an advertising network, or for example, their development through Google or Facebook. That means that, a specific organization or company sort of spies on me through multiple spaces. So, and this is, when I was trying to read sort of what were the discussions around that area. I'm sorry if it's too small for you to read, but I'm going to sort of reiterate that. And if you can see on the left-hand side, 2001, cookies have been branded as spyware tools or some kind of subversive software, the chairman of the IAB United Kingdom says, but it's what we use every day. And for me, this is a really crucial point, because this was a point where web cookies were sort of legitimized, and even with their names, if you think about it, cookies, what could be harmful with cookies, right? But actually what cookies are a form of spying on our behavior throughout time. So another thing that happened with this kind of the IAB that wanted to standardize the behavior and the sort of the measuring of behaviors was that they wanted to do filtration. So basically, you have all of these things that are happening online, but you also have the market, right? You have a new market where you're trying to measure these behaviors so that then you can trade them. So what you want to do is that you want to actually measure human behavior, because that's what's valuable for you. So what the IAB basically have done is that they spied on different kind of behaviors, and with doing that, they also praise different kind of things that for them is robotic behavior, and therefore should not be included in the kind of the measuring of different kind of behaviors. So some of the things that they wanted to measure and standardize was users performing multiple sequential activities, users with highest levels of activities, users who act in consistent interaction attributes, and other suspicious activity. Now, the reason that I'm saying that is that actually, if you focus on what these things are, both spam and cookies are the exact same thing. Both of them are a form of communication that is automated for direct marketing and without prior consent. But the reason why the advertising industry, which, what you were seeing there with, the legislation in the EU was after intense lobbying of the advertising industry. What they were trying to do is to sort of to standardize and legalize different kind of practices, which means web cookies, while illegalizing other practices which can harm the way that they measure behaviors online and sort of disrupt the way that they understand different behaviors online. Now, this is how cookies actually, if you listen to cookies, how they appear. So from the left, this is Privacy Badger, Light Gleam, that unfortunately doesn't exist anymore, in Baycloud. And as you can sort of listen here, is that you have dozens, if not hundreds, of web cookies. So if we're thinking about processed listening, this is exactly that. But you have different kind of organizations. It could be, first party cookie, it could be Facebook, it could be Google, it could be Amazon, it could be, Apple, different kind of organization who listen to your behavior throughout time. So, they listen to my behavior today, but it doesn't mean that they say, oh, today is the 3rd of February, so we have enough information about Elinor, so we're going to stop spying on her. No, they continuously spy on my behavior in order to produce this kind of richer profiles throughout time, in order to produce a profile. And, the kind of things that they listen to you, the kind of the topics, if we're thinking about the communication of web cookies, is, hundreds and hundreds of things that they listen to you on a daily basis. Now, moving on to, we talked about the first phase, which is the production of knowledge, right? The production of the profiles, the process listening, these companies are listening to my behavior. So you're like, okay, so what do they actually do with this knowledge? And this is where I moved to the second concept that I developed, which is Media, how they order this knowledge. What do they actually do with that? And here I'm showing you the real-time bidding sort of specification, which Facebook basically sort of developed further with their ad auction. And we can realize here is that behind the screen, we have these kind of biddings that are happening within milliseconds that are, bidded according to our profiles, and then order different kind of things according to these perceived profiles. Now, this is, if you want to get a better example of sort of what is actually happening and sort of the data leakage, I really recommend you to see Brave, which is a browser that I really recommend you to use, because it's a much more privacy preserving browser. And as you can see here, we have a lot of different kind of organizations, and the DSP that you can see on the side is basically bidding on different kind of ads that they can show you at that time. Now, when I was talking about these kind of the multiplicities and why I think that sound is a better way to think about these things is exactly this, because we have so many companies and even governments. Brave was actually there. They've conducted a lot of really great research. One of them was showing that British councils are actually spying over people who are looking for different kind of health advices, even, for mental health and things like that, and then trade that. So, when we're thinking about the multiplicities of companies that are involved in this kind of online market, we're talking about dozens, if not hundreds, of companies that are conducting this kind of listening of our behaviors. Now, I wanted to sort of show the legacy for me, because I feel like, again, that web cookies for me are the foundation of everything that we're talking about today. Their legalization and their standardization is part of the browser. So, what you saw before with the IETF standard meant that browsers automatically send me the cookies. So that's part of a default setting that is setting the way that I experience different kind of websites and in general the web. So the legacy of cookies, as you can see here, continues. So let's see how much choice I have. And I don't know if you're living in the US and in Canada, I'm not sure that you have that, because in the EU we have more control. So as you can see here, let's see how much control we have. So when I downloaded the new browser, which you saw before with Brave, basically they asked me, do I accept cookies from Facebook? So I, of course, said, no, I don't want to accept cookies. So I said, manage data settings. And as you can see on the right-hand side, what they basically tell me is that without cookies, you will see blah, 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 blah. But the only option that I have to do here, or the only thing that I can actually do, is to accept. So as what I'm trying to show basically is that through these kind of web browsers, through this kind of the legalization and standardization of web cookies, which are a spying technology, and through making us do these kind of clicks that are supposedly providing us more control and power, but the power that we have is to press I agree and I consent and all these kind of things, is basically narrowing our understanding of what we can do on the web and on the internet. And in return, also what we can demand, because if I don't know that there are different kind of ways to experience the web, maybe there could be ways where there's no spying and no trading of my profile, it's more difficult for me as a citizen to ask for a different thing. And I'm going to show you shortly how that relates to the research that I'm doing now on data literacies. So sort of to give you more sort of recent examples of what I mean when I talk about Media, and to sort of the shaping of our experience in a specific way, as you know, Facebook changes its algorithms all the time, and it conducts experiments on us all the time. You know, we sort of got to understand some of it with the emotion contagion big experiment, and everybody was outraged, but actually these experiments happen all the time, and that shapes what kind of things we engage with on Facebook. So what Jennifer Greigel, I hope that I'm saying her name correctly, shows is that, you know, before the 2016 election, Facebook changed the algorithm to show us less news and more interaction with friends and family, because they thought that this is, you know, the way that we want to experience. And, you know, this again shows the politics of when they're talking about different kind of things like organic feed, that nothing is organic on Facebook, and that, you know, the different kind of business model and the different kind of arrangement that they have with different kind of businesses, and at the same time, different kind of pressures that they have from government, I'm going to show you shortly, dictates how we're going to, you know, experience these platforms. Now, before I continue, I just want to say that I think it's really important for me to emphasize that I do not sort of say that there is a direct connection between if I'm going to see something on Facebook and that I'm actually going to do or think something. So a lot of the conversation around Cambridge Analytica, and that, you know, a lot of people were shown, for example, in the US, different kind of ads to, and especially, you know, Black voters were shown a lot of ads around Hillary Clinton in order to dissuade them from voting. I think it's really hard for us as researchers to actually understand what motivates people to behave in one way or another, and to specifically locate their behavior to, you know, what's happening on Facebook. So I'm not arguing for a direct influence, but I am saying that this narrows what we understand and how we can imagine and what we can demand from these companies. So yeah, this was a really interesting article, which I really recommend you to see, by Kevin Roos, I think his name is. And basically what he showed there is an experiment that Facebook has conducted before this election, where they basically wanted to see what is going to happen. You know, how do people define what is good for the world or bad for the world? You know, forget about how difficult this research is with this framing. But basically what they've done is that you realize that if, you know, then what people define as bad for the world, they decided, okay, let's just remove that. But then the company realized that once you take away a lot of the things that people consider as bad, then people don't enter Facebook as much. And therefore, what they did is to reintroduce kind of bad things, which could be a bazillion different kind of things, and introduce them because they didn't want people to engage less. So I want us to keep that in mind when we're thinking about, you know, different kind of orderings. And this is an example of Facebook. We have a lot of examples from, you know, Google and Amazon and different kind of companies of how they reorder our experiences for, you know, for profit, basically, because these companies are, you know, we use them for free, but there is a really high price when we use them. And this is another really great research by The Markup, which is a magazine founded by who I think is one of the best investigative journalists around algorithms, Julia Angwin, where they basically show how different kind of algorithmic changes change what different kind of people engage with on these platforms. And again, I'm not saying that necessarily engaging with one article or another necessarily influences you, but it does basically enables you to engage with specific things in specific times. And this is quite dangerous because a lot of people actually don't understand that there is algorithmic ordering. So the consequences of Rith Media is profiling of people, amplifying mis and disinformation and conspiracy theories, content moderation, micro-targeting, real-time bidding without any regulation, even though now the European Union and the FTC do want to sort of crack down on this industry. But until, as we know, these things take quite a lot of time. And at the moment, it's kind of running wild without any kind of supervision or regulation. And as I said before, for me, one of the main things is that these companies basically shape how we experience and how we know different kind of things. So I want to jump, and for me, the job that I'm doing right now, as Fenwick said before, around data literacies, is inherently related to this work, because basically in my book, I was sort of unpacking and listening to what is happening in the back end, trying to show all of the things that, you know, these companies want to hide from us, and to say, oh, this is objective, this is just, you know, machine learning and mathematical stuff that, you know, it's all the kind of objective and without any kind of economic rationale whatsoever. And what I'm doing right now is to sort of understand, how do people understand, how do people then engage? What do they actually understand from, you know, their engagement with the internet and the web and different kind of services online? So this is from a survey that we conducted in September last year, but I think that it still sort of resonate a lot of the things that these people have said. And this is people from the UK. As you can see, do you trust social media? A drastic no. And do you agree or disagree about the statement, I don't mind sharing? Most people mind, they don't want their data to be shared. But for me, one of the most interesting findings was this. On the right hand, you see acceptability of companies using your personal information to track your behavior over time. And as you can see, the majority of people do not want their behaviors to be tracked throughout time. But then when we ask people, do you accept, you know, companies to use your personal information to personalize your experience? And then, as you can see, people don't mind as much. And what can be understood from these two questions is that people don't understand that the two are linked, that the reason why their experience is personalized is because these companies are tracking them over time. And this is why I think it's so important for us to reveal and sort of unpack a lot of these decisions and when they were made, and understand that that shapes how people, you know, how they think and how they understand these companies. Another really interesting question that we asked people was, you know, what do they think about privacy settings? And most people think that there is no point in changing their privacy settings because company will be able to, you know, arrange the settings anyway, which is, you know, what is happening with Facebook basically, and is what is happening with this kind of button of I consent, right? What am I supposed to understand from that? Because I can negotiate, right? And this is one of the points that I'm making in the book. If I only click OK and I agree, the only way that I can understand this kind of one direction contract and this kind of power relation is that I can only agree. And any other contract that I have with companies, I usually can negotiate or say, okay, maybe I don't want this, maybe I want that. You know, if my landlord decides tomorrow, oh, you know what, Elinor, I think I'm gonna start living in your living room all of a sudden. That would be weird, right? But then when it's online contracts, it's all of a sudden okay to do different kind of things where I have basically no saying, and you know, it's quite a one direction kind of power relation hierarchy. So I think the overarching question that I'm trying to ask is this the only way that we can experience the internet and the web? And I hope that it is, the answer is no, because I think that now a lot of people do realize, and in focus groups that we conducted basically in November and December, a lot of people, you know, said, you know, we don't understand our privacy settings, but we would love to know how, and we would love to know what to do. And I think that a lot of people feel quite discouraged because it's just too complicated to understand. So I'm ending here with a quote from the book, which is, deviant media categories are about the struggles to determine what is human, what is normal, and what is social. It is about what makes us as individuals and society. It is about the default settings of our lives. So with that, I'm gonna try to stop sharing and start listening to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for a great presentation, Elinor. And I just want to encourage all the attendees to, if you have questions, to type them into the Q&A box. And we're asking questions that way just because we've had issues with Zoom bombings in the past. So I hope you can understand that. So it's just at the bottom of your screen to ask questions there. Maybe because I think people are writing questions right now, I can start us off with one question. So one thing that I really love both about your presentation and in the book is that you really point out the issue of this kind of false informed consent, right? With those kind of I accept cookies and so forth, and how the onus is so much on the individual. Could you maybe speak about some of the suggestions you have to move the onus away from it being on individuals, either having to change their browsers or having to learn about all of the ins and outs of cookies? For like, what kind of model do you suggest we move towards?
Well, I think that we already have quite good models. The question is if the advertising companies and you know, the big tech companies are actually respecting that. And we know that is just not the case. So a lot of the times, you know, there are laws, you know, you have the GDPR, you have a lot of, you know, you're technically supposed to ask consent, and people are supposed to understand what they are consenting to and which kind of companies are involved in the processing of your information. But, you know, people just cannot understand, and people can't know that. So for me, this could be in multiple ways, but fundamentally, instead of, you know, trying to fix the different kind of tweaks, which could be, you know, different kind of terms and agreements where people can actually understand what they are agreeing to, but also ways to negotiate that. But at the end of the day, it's about the business model. So at the moment, as you know, I think one of the interesting things that we saw with Signal and, you know, people moving to Signal was that there was an alternative platform to WhatsApp, right? Like a more privacy sort of privacy aware and privacy, you know, and also with browsers, right? Like I can move to Brave. But at the moment, I feel like a lot of other companies don't, and especially Facebook, doesn't have an alternative that we can move to. And a lot of people are not aware that you can have like other kind of search engines and things like that. So to me, it's about the business model. It's about having different kind of companies. At the moment, these companies are huge, and you know, even if we're going to have the antitrust cases where, you know, oh, okay, great, so now we're going to have Facebook and Instagram separately, that's not going to matter because they already have the data. And also, you know, they're saying they're doing a lot of things. You know, when I think when they bought Instagram, they say, or in WhatsApp, oh, we're never going to take that data away. And then like after a couple of years, oh, we hope that you forgot about that, but we are actually going to take that data. So I think for me, it's a multiple of things. It's about different kind of business model, different types of enforcement. At the moment, like what, you're going to punish them with a couple of millions? That's not gonna, I mean, nobody cares. Like Bezos does that in like, when he goes to the bathroom, he makes more money than the kind of, you know, things that they're asked. So to me, one of the main issues is that we have a whole, you know, online market that, you know, is moving fast and breaking a lot of things, including our societies and our democracies. But we don't have the right instruments, both legally and both in terms of like enforcement to, you know, even if they are good, there's no enforcement. So I would say different business model, a different type of enforcement, which is much quicker and has actual teeth, which doesn't involve money, involve different kind of things, which for me ideally would be to ask approval, you know. One of the things that are happening, right? Like, so Facebook does all of these experiments on us, and they're like, oh, maybe we hurt some people here and there. And you're like, well, no, this is not okay. For me, like a lot of, I think every algorithmic change should actually go through different kind of ethical boards to see if this could actually harm society, then this cannot be done. And it's happening in the pharmaceutical industry, and it should also happen in the technology industry, because to be honest, not everything has to be outside, not everything has to be invented, especially, you know, facial recognition and all these stuff. So to me, we just need to, like a different way of thinking about this, and it has to be much faster than it is right now. So this was a very short answer.
No, that was great. I'll read the first question. So Vera asks, do you think the GDPR really has privacy issues as its motivating factor, or is it essentially based on economic interests?
I think it's a great question, Vera. Thank you for asking. I personally think that the whole GDPR is flawed because the only thing that they're focusing on is personal data. Whereas, especially as feminists, we know that, nothing is personal, everything is connected and interconnected, right? And, many researchers have already proven that, with only 4 data points, you can identify people. And so this kind of the distinction between personal data and data in general is flawed. So the premise of that, regulation is flawed to begin with. Another problematic thing is that DPAs, which is the data protection authorities in different kind of countries across Europe, don't really have the resources to actually do the enforcement. So I think it was Max Schrems, or I think maybe again Brave, if I'm not mistaken, have done research to see how much money do these authorities actually have to deal with these things. And I can tell you that it's really not a lot. So, and they actually, the amount of cases that they manage to actually address is really, really few. And I don't know if you saw the latest sort of inquiry into the ICO, where we realized, that apparently there's a secret sort of deal with Facebook around the Cambridge Analytica. And basically, I think that a lot of it has to do because these, you have all these like multi-billion companies compared to like countries who provide very little resources to these, enforcement bodies. And I think it's really not really like a proper power relation. So I think that the GDPR is a good start. I think that unfortunately it's not enough. And I think it was heavily lobbied like a lot of other laws. So it has a lot of issues. So I think at the moment it's not quite what people hope for it to be, but I think it's a way forward.
Thank you so much. I'm going to pass it over to Fenwick, who's going to ask the next questions.
Okay.
Great. I think I'll ask, we have an anonymous question here asking about this question of personalization. And one of the challenges that we have is that personalization is nice and it makes for a more intuitive experience and has lots more of a productivity and efficiency. And so this attendee is wondering, is there a way to provide personalization without having to share so much of our behavioral data? How do you find the balance between this kind of demand to collect and an ability of offering a better web experience?
So thank you, anonymous asker. I think that it is a balance. Sometimes it's nice, sometimes it's not nice. The problem is that because all of this industry is quite opaque and we have no idea what's happening in the back end because of these kind of standards and default settings, it's really difficult for us to know who is involved in this kind of this trading. So first of all, I think there should be a much stricter regulation because it's quite crazy that for more than 2 decades, it's running wild without anybody, regulating it. But another thing is that I don't necessarily agree that personalization is the best thing for everybody. I think that there should be different types of way to engage online, but personalization is sold to us basically as the best way, but it's technically the only way in a lot of places. So, what I do in the book on the chapter of Facebook, on the desktop option, you can actually, I'm not sure if you can still do that, but I was testing throughout a year different kind of ordering. So I was trying to see, what is Facebook showing me? And I was always prioritizing most recent posts, but it was always changing it to, a most popular or top stories. And, because for Facebook, top stories mean, more popular, hence more engagement, hence me going to the platform more and, more profit for it. So I think we somehow have to manage and balance that. But at the moment, it doesn't seem like we can have personalization without exploitation. To me, it's about regulation. It's about designing different platforms differently. Like, I think that we should be able to understand what's happening in the back end. And, it's always funny, right? Like, I'm sure all of you here have like, I don't know, dozens of browsers, websites open at the moment. It's not going to confuse us. I think that with if we would have, and we would understand, and we would have different kind of, maybe like a panel where we engage with all the cookies and all the platforms and try to understand that, I think that will give us a better indication and a better grasp of that. But I think at the moment, we don't have a way to do that. And if I would be able to do that, I wouldn't be an academic. I would probably be in Silicon Valley. So yeah, I don't think there is an answer at the moment.
Great, thank you for that question. I have another audience question. This one is from Janisha, who asks, how should we address the polarization and radicalization brought by profit-driven tech companies such as Facebook? And maybe just to add on to this question, I'd like to ask how changing our model of, our feed model and moving away from this personalization model might, help circumvent some of this polarization and radicalization online.
Let me just read the question again. How should we address? I think at the end of the day, a lot of what we are engaging with on platforms is quite the minority. So one of an interesting insights from our current research, which you're going to see in a report soon, is that all of the people we asked, and we had 15 focus groups with different types of people, and 99% of them said that they don't share things on social media, but they do discuss it on messaging apps. So I think that a lot of people that and this sort of corroborates with research that shows that actually the people who tweet are maybe like 8 or 10% of the whole amount of Twitter, which means that most of the people and bots on Twitter are people who are listening and who are not the vocal ones. So I think when we're talking about radicalization, we need to remember that a lot, just because this is what the platforms amplify, doesn't mean that this is what most people think. And I do think that because of the current business model, these are the things that are being amplified even more, because of course they're bringing more engagement, and this is what you saw with the research that I showed before. And I think a couple of days ago, there was a research by Wall Street Journal journalists that basically revealed that, Facebook knew about all of this radicalization happening much before now the whole surge on the 6th of January. So I personally don't have a solution to that, but, and I think that we need to be very careful with giving platforms the kind of the ability to be the arbiters of truth, or the arbiters of of good or bad. And yeah, I don't know if there is a solution to that, but to me, the kind of the need to be approved for different kind of algorithmic changes could be one way of thinking about this.
Thank you. Greg, did you want to ask your question?
And I think also there's Courtney that I'm seeing that is raising her hand for a while.
Okay. Greg?
Yes, thanks. Sorry, I can't seem to get my video going, but I am here, Elinor.
Yes.
Great to see you again. I think Elinor is the last person I actually saw at a conference before COVID hit. So anyway, all that to say, it's nice to see you again. I really enjoyed your talk.
Thank you.
I guess maybe just a quick comment and then a question. I really enjoyed the book, and particularly the two concepts that you touched on, the process listening with media, which for me is very generative, particularly in the context of emerging audio-based forms of online surveillance. Siri, Alexa, and all these other kind of voice-activated assistants. Yeah. So I don't know if you want to talk a bit about that afterwards, but my question is more around the news that Google just put out a couple of weeks ago, their decision to actually move beyond or to stop using cookies it's, I think, just a couple weeks old now, or at least third-party cookies, sorry, to be precise. They want to move beyond the third-party cookie, and the browsers, the Apples or the so-called FANG companies, I think are now getting ready for a protracted kind of battle over what the future will be like. I hate asking these questions about what's next or what's the future, but Elinor, I'd really like to hear your thoughts on whether or not this is an opportunity, or this is going to be a retrenchment of exactly what you've already laid out for us today.
Yeah, thank you very much. And again, I think your book, Profiling Machine, is being quite groundbreaking and quite early. It was like 2003, before Facebook, and all of these kind of companies have started to do all of these things. So I think it was quite revolutionary in sort of understanding what is the dangers of this kind of profiling practices. So I think that relates to what I want to say, that we're seeing not only with Google, we're seeing all of the fights now with Apple and Facebook, which I found to be quite funny. That privacy is becoming like a leverage point, and privacy is becoming this like, oh, we're not going to spy on you. But as we know, there are so many other ways of spying over people. Google doesn't necessarily need cookies. It spies on us through our emails, through a lot of other things, through fingerprinting. So there are a lot of other things other than cookies that could be, done. And, I guess if I would have started my research now, I would sort of do maybe like an evolution of different kind of spying mechanisms and showing how, they tap into that. I think that I don't really know what's made them say that, but a lot of it has to do with kind of different kind of conflicts that these companies have with Facebook or Apple or different kind of things. So my guess, it's a step against Facebook as well, because these companies, want to make to have like a leverage point. I think also for Google, one of the other concerning thing that came out of our research, I'm sharing all of the insights, but I have to, because it's such like, it was so, when we asked all the people in the focus group, so if you want to look for information, where do you go? And unanimously, everybody go on either Google search or YouTube. And, so these are also for them a source of, of income. So I don't necessarily think that for Google, losing third-party cookies would be like a travesty, like it would be for Facebook. So, I think it's an interesting move, and I would definitely like more of these companies to move towards that. But none of these companies are notorious for actually caring about people. So, I don't really know where it's going, but as you said, we already have different kind of other kind of devices that we enter into the most intimate spaces, which is our homes, through Amazon Alexa, and what is Google? Forgot.
Or Siri, Apple Siri.
Yeah, exactly. I don't have these things because I'm I just can't. But a lot of the times we just, it's difficult to not use them. And again, a lot of it has to do with like, people don't understand what are the consequences of that. So I don't know if I answered, but I think for me, you're going to have cookies, you're going to have so many, the spying techniques are developing so much. But for me, one of the most important thing is to actually acknowledge this is spying. We can, make it all nice and fuzzy with cookies and whatever. But I find it that, actually saying this is spying without people's knowledge or consent is so important. And this is why, as media scholars, it's so important for us to contextualize these debates. Like, this is not machine, like I showed at the beginning of the article that I wrote, sort of criticizing Facebook, saying, oh, we're just taking inventory, this is just machine learning. No, this is spying. And what you're doing is spying over people's behavior without their proper consent, because when I'm pressing, and as you saw before, it's not like I even have any other option to press if I want to use Facebook. So to me, it's kind of like, you know, I think what's good about Shoshana Zuboff is she sort of raised these kind of voices again, even though I know a lot of media scholars have been talking about these things for years, and this is not a new thing. And this is also partly why I'm also examining Bell Telephone Company, where I'm showing, you know, surveillance of populations and people has always been a part of, you know, media technologies. So it's important to show the longer lineage. Spying technologies are always going to be developed. So whereas, you know, web cookies, third-party cookies, getting rid of them would be a positive thing, I would also check if it's actually right. Because one of the interesting things that, for example, the Markup is doing, Julia Angwin's magazine, is to show that many times when Facebook says, oh, you know, one of the amazing things that she's done is to sort of expose a lot of the fact that you can target only a Black community, or, you know, exclude a Black community. And, you know, Facebook said, oh, we're not going to allow that anymore. But then they kept on checking and following up on what these companies actually say. And they realized that it wasn't true. So I would actually follow up on Google and see if it's actually true. So this is the short answer. I hope that I answered. Thank you. I love the background, by the way.
So I'm just going to ask a question from an anonymous attendee, and then maybe afterwards, Lisa, you can ask your question if that works. So Anonymous asks, what kinds of strategies could be employed to mobilize users in using alternative platforms to minimize data leakage and turn away from popular platforms such as Facebook?
This is the $1 million question, or I guess today a bit more because the dollar is not so high. But I think it's really difficult. This is what we're trying to understand with the current project that I'm working on, me and my big data, developing citizens data literacies. I think that we need to understand that people come from different literacies, abilities, and what we see from our research is that if you come from like lower socioeconomic status and lower education attainment, then you know less and you do less in terms of privacy settings and things like that. So unfortunately today, you know, a lot of the education programs and all of the ministers say, hey, let's teach the kids to code because that's the future. Which is like, okay, but we also need to teach the kids that, you know, there's other ways to think about that. So I think that we need to have different kind of educational programs. We actually target the older generation because we feel like they're kind of left out of the picture, because a lot of the debate is just like, oh, let's educate the kids, which we should do. But actually, you know, there is an older generation that is really not familiar with a lot of these things. And they don't have these kind of structures like a school or a university where they can go to and be taught with this. So what we are suggesting in our research is to think about it through networks of literacies. Because what we realize is that, you know, unlike a lot of the literature around literacy that focuses on the individual, and through our focus groups as well, we discovered that people, you know, they would ask their family, would ask their friend, they would ask, you know, different kind of colleagues or whatever. And we want to tap into that, and we want to try to understand how can we make that happen. So I think that there isn't one solution to this, and governments should be on board and to provide the necessary resources for that to happen. And not only to, you know, upskill people to have employment, but actually to have a critical thinking and to have an understanding, and to know that, you know, if you want to browse, or if you want to browse, you can use Brave. If you want to do search, you can go to DuckDuckGo. That there are alternatives. Sometimes they're not the best, because let's face it, DuckDuckGo sometimes is not the best, and then you have to go to Google search because it's slightly better, but you have opportunities. I did a whole campaigning to my family together with my brother to move to Signal. And at the beginning, you know, our parents were like, oh, we don't know, all our friends are there. We're like, okay, you don't have to move all your friends, but this is like a step forward. Sometimes blackmail also works. So we blackmailed my mother and said that she's not going to get her grandchildren pictures if she's not going to move to Signal. So different kind of methods work. No, but seriously, we need more resources and more spaces where people can actually experiment in that. And this goes back to another argument that I've been saying, that we don't really have free spaces anymore, within cities where people can actually engage with that. And the last ones are the libraries. But in the UK, at least, I don't know what's the situation in Canada, in the past decades, when, the Tories have been in the government, we have more than 800 libraries that got shut down. And so if you're poor and you don't really have a computer or, somewhere to actually experiment with these kind of things, that's really problematic. So we also need to think about how can we actually create spaces for people who do not have, devices or whatever to actually experiment with that, and to create an environment, a safe environment where they can learn new, different kind of skills.
Thank you. Lisa, did you want to?
Hi, thanks, Alex. And thank you especially, Elinor, but also Fen and Greg for the chance to cooperate in these rough times on the series. It's great to be here, and I feel a little better connected in the best sense. And I appreciate, Elinor, you're resisting the idea that this is too complicated or something that we needn't understand. I mean, the sort of structural practice of obfuscation is familiar. It's familiar in law. It reminds me of Elizabeth Warren refusing the idea that, the economic terms of the 2008 crash were too difficult to understand, derivatives, etc. No, it's not. The question I would like to pose is, strikes me as a bit old-fashioned. It's not something I'm advocating at all, and almost analog, which is whether there have been attempts in commercial tech to monetize privacy, the old sort of market strategy of taking something away and then selling it back. Take away space on an airplane and then sell it back with 5 different grades of seats. And if you, for this much money, you'll get 4 more inches of legroom. So I'm curious about whether the way streaming services, you can have an ad-free subscription base. If there have been any attempts to float, keep your privacy, pay a subscription fee. I think it would be very cynical, but that isn't in the way necessarily.
Thank you for your question. I think it's a really good question and an important one. I think that, if I'm not mistaken, I saw recently a different type of advertising, which was contextual advertising rather than this kind of spying. So depending on where, for example, if I'm reading an article about alcohol, I would get advertisements about alcohol. So rather than, profiling me and spying on my behavior, they would adjust the ads according to the content that is presented, and then they wouldn't have to do that. I think that, and we have other companies like, I guess, Netflix, that doesn't really have ads. And I think that it's working, as we saw today. I don't know how. Emily in Paris is nominated to the Golden Globes. God, I have no idea how that happened. So I think, people are experimenting with trying to make privacy as a more leverage point. And I know that specifically Brave and DuckDuckGo promise not to track people. So in their default setting, they're not tracking you and they're not using your identity or search words and stuff like that. So I think that there are already companies that are doing that. Unfortunately, they're not as big as the big ones. So, it's about alternatives and if people actually know about them. So a lot of it is about awareness and, being able to know about the alternatives. But I think that as time progresses, I think that more and more people understand what are the dangers in that. And for me, the move to Signal was quite surprising, to be honest. But it really felt like people start to realize what are the consequences. So, you know, I think that there are companies that are already leveraging the more privacy friendly as a leverage point for their services. And I think that we're gonna see that more in the future. So I hope
nice
that
not to have to, it would be nice not to have to choose, you know, that but that would require a different kind of regulation anyhow.
Well, we have privacy by design, it's in the GDPR, but is it actually, you know, is somebody actually following that? No. So sometimes you can have amazing rules, but if nobody's actually, you know, following them, and if nobody's enforcing them, then they're quite useless. And this is, I think, one of the interesting thing about this kind of the online environment that we're engaging with, is that, you know, even when the rules are there, it's not really, you know, practical if people are not, if companies are not following them. And, you know, Facebook doesn't really feel like, I don't know if you saw the whole debacle in Australia. Australia now wants both Google and Facebook to pay to publisher for distributing content, right? And what Google basically said, like any mafia leader would say, is that, oh, we're just gonna not be in your country anymore. So I think that what's going on there is going to be quite interesting, but, you know, these companies are so big that they're saying, oh, so we're just going to leave, which I think could be a positive thing, because people then are going to be required to, you know, to use alternatives. But, you know, at the moment, you have very few players, very few countries who are actually doing this kind of fighting and trying to sort of change. And I think that the more we're going to have more cases like that, the more these companies are going to start to have to change. And so, yeah, I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Those cases in Australia and France are also being used to mobilize in Canada right now too.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
One of our participants, Joni, suggested that maybe VPNs might be something close to that. But maybe Fenwick, would you like to ask the question from Vera?
Yes, certainly. So Vera asks, and I think this is a really great question when we talk about the turn in surveillance studies and how it's advanced, is do you think surveillance is applied to the population generically, or do you think it affects marginalized groups differently? And how would you think about that nuance?
I think that surveillance has existed many, many years. I amplify 3 case studies. One of them is also analog, so it's with Bell Telephone. And I think that case is quite interesting, because what I showed there is the politics around sound and noise, and how Bell Telephone collaborated with New York City to do a noise map in New York City in the end of the 1920s. And what I show there is that the people that were categorized as noisy were African American and immigrants, because these people had to be taken away from the city to reorganize the city to towards a more, you know, commerce friendly. So some places where they wanted it was a noise abatement committee, and part of the noise abatement committee was Bell Telephone, but also insulation companies and real estate companies. And I think that throughout history, we always see, you know, marginalized people that are being affected by these kind of spying practices the most, because this is exactly when we're talking about this kind of the hierarchies of power and the power relation. Of course, people who have a lot to lose, and people who have traditionally, when we're talking about knowledge production, have been, you know, marginalized and have been harmed, and have been sort of the target of these kind of experiments. We can see that repeating itself again and again. So I think that what these kind of what we're listening here with Facebook and more contemporary surveillance practices is sort of exacerbating existing and past inequalities, and they're just, you know, becoming enlarged, and, you know, with different kind of artificial intelligence and all of, you know, the machine learning training, which is trained over different kind of data sets that are based on already skewed kind of knowledge production practices. So I think that, yes, and of course, these people don't have lobbyists and don't have different kind of people to protect them in different kind of places. So I think the short answer is yes, that people who are marginalized have always been impacted by these things much more, by surveillance practices much more. And this also includes women, by the way. This is why we need to start changing this kind of the power relation and the balance here. And for me, it's quite important to actually, if we're gonna start saying, actually, it's not okay for us to spy, it's just not okay. I think it's just so normalized. We're just not like, I have one piece that I wrote a couple of years ago where I tried to sort of make the cookie experience more physical and more like you would feel it. And I describe myself walking in the street and I have like a dozen people following me, and then like 100 people following me, and then like hundreds of people following me. And then I'm completely terrified. And then all of them say, which is what the advertising companies say, don't worry, we don't know your actual name. Because this is what they're saying. Oh, we don't actually know your name. We just have like a number of the cookie, you know, that basically it gives you like, and then you are still anonymous, but it's still spying. And you still know a lot of other things about me. So I think as more and more services are being, you know, they're becoming digital. And I think with the current climate of COVID-19, we realize that everything that you want to do is digital. So I think that these kind of things are, you know, making it more difficult for people who have something to lose. And this could be, you know, LGBTQI, it could be immigrants, it could be different kind of marginalized communities. But as a whole, as a society, I think all of us lose, because this is not a way, this is not, I think, the way that a lot of people want the society to be in. And I think that at the end of the day, all of us have something to lose. So, you know, I think that while it's important to amplify the marginalized communities that are being harmed, I think it's really important to highlight that actually as a society, we all have something to lose. And at the moment, we don't really know also what are the repercussions and what are the kind of things that are, you know, how our data is going to be used in the future. And as any kind of sci-fi fan knows, you know, we don't want Arnold Schwarzenegger to come to us in a couple of years. And, you know, I'm joking, but I'm not joking as well, because a lot of things that have happened in sci-fi plots have been implemented. We heard yesterday that Matt Hancock from the UK actually took a lot of inspiration from Contagion to manage how COVID-19 will actually run in the country. So, you know, I think that we need to be very careful, because we're basically opening up a sort of, we're making different kind of threshold of what is okay and what is not okay. And I know this is happening also if you're just a kid and you don't even have control over that. And Veronica Barassi has a new book right now about how, you know, different kind of companies are spying and creating these kind of profiles on children. And I think that we should really be worried about that. So whereas I think that marginalized communities are, of course, being harmed by this the most, I think that as a society as a whole, we all are losing in this game.
Thank you. I just wanted to say, so we have one last audience question that maybe Sophie can ask, but we're also running out of time. So we only have our captionist for a couple more minutes. So we'll just ask this one final question. I know some other questions have then popped up since, but we'll just do this last one. And thank you everyone for all of your wonderful questions.
Yes, this last question is from Joni or Johnny, who's asking, in regards to the popularity of Signal, is it because there was a clearer or immediate connection to the general public that could be made between chat communication and privacy? So they give the example for individuals to, you know, like sext each other or do other things that will immediately disappear and not leave a trace, or have settings to have that happen in the app. And I think this kind of connects back to the beginning of your talk about like what's considered deviant communication online. And I think that just adding to this speaker, this might also suggest why people might be reluctant to move to Signal, because it's sort of like discrete, and maybe the discrete is associated with the deviant. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit about that.
Thank you. Really great questions. I think that this comes back actually to default settings and how we experience a lot of these platforms. At the moment, these platforms, the default setting is to archive everything, right? And even platforms that argue that they're not archiving, which is an activity that I used to do with my students, check the terms of use and see that even Snapchat, even though it argues that it deletes, it doesn't actually delete. So that, for example, could be a way for, for people to engage in a different way, and in that way not be fearful that, I don't know, in 10 years when I want to be prime minister, they're going to find stuff of me getting drunk when I was 15, right? Because it's not necessarily something that I thought about at the time, but it could be used against me in various ways, right? And can you repeat just what you asked about the about Signal?
Absolutely. They were wondering if the popularity of Signal might be related to this, existing without a trace idea. And yeah.
I think, again, like I said before, I think that the popularity of Snapchat and all of these kind of applications that are erasing the kind of the content shows that this is something that a huge amount of people want. So, I, for example, use a service that deletes my tweets every 3 months. And I think that it's quite appealing because this kind of the notion that everything has to stay is something that these companies decided this is a good way for me to experience the platform. It doesn't mean that we thought that this is a good way. And again, we're coming back to the fact that these companies present as if we have a lot of options, but actually there's only one option of each. So it's only the data can only, it could stay forever, can only be personalized, but personalized also in only in the way that is profitable for them. And, I think that, yeah, there is something quite appealing in Signal in that way that you feel more comfortable. And, people like my brother who works in cybersecurity, he said to my mom, for example, I'm not going to send my kids pictures because I don't feel that it's secure. And people have different kind of motives, and it doesn't have to be a kid's picture or a dick pic or whatever for us to want it to not be shared with everybody. And this is, I think, one of the main problems that with these kind of slick interface design, we think that this is only communicated in our networks, right? Like, I think if I'm posting on Facebook, I'm sharing it only with my friends or whatever, but actually this is not true. So, it's shared and traded with so many other organizations. And I think if people would feel that, and people would and it would have different kind of interfaces which make it more visible and also more, physical, and understand the repercussions of that, I think people would be much more deterred from what's happening and would, try to change their behavior. So a lot of it has to do also with the kind of the default setting, the politics of default settings, and the politics of slick interface design.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I just want to be cognizant of your time as well as the captionist time and everyone who has attended today. Thank you again to our captionist, Ishan. Thank you so much, Dr. Elinor Carmi, for a great talk. Thank you to Fenwick, Lisa, and Greg for being sponsors of this event. And thank you again, everyone who's attended. Please check out our websites to see the various upcoming events. There's so many exciting ones, both within Greg, Lisa, and Fenwick series, as well as the Disrupting Disruptions one. So we look forward to seeing you at future events. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for your great questions. I really enjoyed, and have a great evening, afternoon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.